All right, we are now ready for the final part 4, which is graphing. And I really love this part because though it's great to kind of summarize the data here and do some conditional formatting, it's not until I make graphs that I can really be able to quickly interpret what is happening in different places. The visual is so important in statistics. So we're going to first start with a column graph. The directions are here. I personally find it easier if I move them over a little bit. And I'm going to start by highlighting state column for critical reading scores to make a chart. So I'm going to have a chart of the states and the reading. Now they're right next to each other, so they're not next to each other, so I can't just highlight all of them. I'm going to end up with this participation right in the middle. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to highlight states, Control Shift down. I'm going to then hold the Control key down. I'm not letting go of it. And then I'm going to go over to critical reading and highlight all the way up. I still have not let go of the Control key. Now I let go of the Control key. I've got these two things highlight. I can go over to Insert. And then I'm going to make a bar graph, okay? So that's this one right here. And I'm just going to choose a 2D bar graph and click on that. Now I'd like to remind you again that remembering these things the next day isn't so easy, so you might want to take note. We had gone to Insert to do it. So I might do this if I were you, which is go to my notes, to our sheet that's got all the list of the Excel skills, and under chart maybe make a note to yourself of how you did it, how you highlighted the data first and then went to Insert. All right, we have our first graph. Looking at it immediately, I'm going to just go to the corner and I get that arrow, make it a little bit bigger. It's kind of hard for me to say what's really going on, so let's do a little bit more to this, all right? Let's first label the axes, okay? So there's no axes labels in here. Now, the way I can put things in here is to activate the chart, and what I mean by that is if I click outside back onto my table, I'm working back on my worksheet. My chart is not activated, but if I click on the edge of my chart, you see these little circles here, right along here? When I have these little circles along the outer edge, I know that my chart is activated and I can now do things to it. So I have a couple options of what I can do. If I look up here at my ribbon, the tabs have changed a little bit. It says Chart Tools up here, and I have Design Tools, and I also have Formatting Tools. They are different. I'm going to mainly be in Design. So if I'm in Design and I want to put in axes, there are two ways to do it. One is I can just, let's start with one way, add a chart element. So I'm going to go to Axes Titles, right? And I can put a primary horizontal title, and then I can write down right in here, click right in there, and I just write down state. All right? And I can do the same, but still activated. I'm just going to add a chart title on the vertical, and here we're going to put the average SAT score, or sorry, that was the reading score. Reading score. All right. All right, so at least now I have these axes. Now, it's hard for me to really tell a difference because it seems so slight, and that's because every single one of these is higher than 400. So if I could kind of focus on just this upper area. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to double click. So this is my y-axis on the numbers here. So I double click on these numbers. And when I double click on these numbers, you're going to see a menu pop out right here. I have a couple different things on this menu that I can choose from. I'm going to go over here, okay, to this data tab. I'm looking at axes options. And what I want to do is I want to really focus on the top, so I don't need anything below 400. So I'm going to set my minimum at 400 so I can see a little bit better what is happening, how the data is changing. Hit enter. And notice now I can start to really see the differences across the states. All right, this is getting hard for me to keep track of what I'm doing, so I'm just going to quickly highlight what I have done right here and make that text red so that I can keep track. Okay, so now I want to remove a legend. This one doesn't have a legend, so I'm actually okay with that. So that one's all right. I don't need to worry about that. But I'm going to now go to give it this title, Critical Reading by State. So I'm just going to copy that title, highlight it, Control C, and I'm just going to come right over to the title up here. So once I click on Chart Title, I can actually just go right up here to the window and paste it, and it will show up right there. All right, so now I've got my title, And one thing I can say is it's hard to read data like this. If this was printed in a magazine or on the web to look at how states are doing in reading, you would really not quite know. You'd be like, oh, wait, somebody's really low. Who is that? Wait, who's the highest? I can't tell one of these guys. You really need that data to be sorted, to be put in a way that you can really see. So we're going to do that. We're going to move this over. I'm going to close this box so it's not in my way anymore. Okay, I'm going to move that over. And I want to sort this data. And the cool thing is that anything I do to my data table gets done over to here. Now this is a really important step because I have to sort, so I have to highlight all of my data. I can't just highlight critical reading, all right, because it's all linked. If I sort this data and don't highlight states, this is going to change, but then the number that's linked to North Dakota is no longer going to be North Dakota's number. So you always have to highlight everything. So I do the regular, I go all the way across, I shift down, I go to sort, custom sort, and I want to do it by reading. Awesome. And now look at that. Now normally when I think about it, we actually always go highest to lowest, so I'm just going to switch that really quickly, custom sort, and I'm just going to do largest to smallest. And that is way more useful. I can immediately identify what states have the highest reading scores and which states have the lowest. All right, looks and visuals are actually incredibly important in statistics. So this still isn't quite enough. I mean, it definitely does not grab me. It does not pop. So I'm going to think about the look of it. So I'm going to select Style 9 and make the bars orange. So again, I need to select it. I'm going to activate that. I go over to Design. So here are my styles. I'm going to drop these down. And if I hover over it, you'll see a style number. There's Style 9. I select it. That looks good, but I think it would look way better if I had orange bars. So I'm going to double click on the bars really quickly. And I want to change colors to orange. So I'm going to go ahead and change colors to, what's my colors? This one. That looks fantastic. To me, that looks much better. The next thing I want to do is put data labels on. So sometimes it's nice to have as much information as possible if it doesn't get too messy. So I'm gonna activate my graph again. All right, so I've activated my graph. I'm going to go to Design. I'm going to add an element, which for me is going to be data labels. Now there's two ways to add an element I'm going to show you right here. One is I can click over here on this menu, and the other way, if you want, is you can also just use this plus sign here if you'd rather work over here and go to data labels this way. Okay, so what data labels are is the number, the value, the reading scores are right above each one of these, and that is really hard to see. I'm going to see if I make this bigger, it's easier. Otherwise, I'm going to get rid of it. So I'm going to go to Move Graph to a new sheet. Okay, I've activated my graph. I've gone to Design. And here it says Move Chart to a new location. So I'm going to click Move. I'm going to give it its own sheet. Okay, and I'm going to call this Reading Scores. And I'm going to say OK. Now my graph is on its own sheet. There's no spreadsheet behind it or anything. I can just focus on this graph. You can see I have a little tab right here that says Reading Scores right here. So I can go to it. I can also just go back to my data, but here's my reading scores. So it's its own place. Now, I still really cannot read these numbers. So I loved the idea of having that data. I often do that if I have fewer bars, but here I just can't see it. So rather than have a messy graph that's hard to interpret, I am just going to remove those data labels. All right, and now I can see the graph better and get an interesting idea of where it is. Might be interesting to try to see where Oregon stands in here. All right, we're now ready for graph 2. This should move a little bit faster. So we're going to do it for math and reading. So that means I've got to highlight both math and reading. They happen to be right next to each other, so I don't have to do that control thing. I can just control shift down. I go to Insert. I want to do a scatter plot. If you hover over it, you can see what it is. There's my scatter. All right, so I now have this scatter plot right here that I can look at. It's hard on that cutoff region, so I'm going to move that up a bit right to here so I can look at it. And when I look at it, it looks kind of funny to me, actually. It definitely looks a little weird. It's just this little blurb up there, so I'm going to need to do something so I can really see what is happening here. First thing I'm going to do is label the axes. Now there's a couple ways to do it as I showed you. You can go to Chart Elements here, for axes labels. The second way, so it gets confusing, there's so many, so just find the one you like. If you like going up here, it always works. If you like going over here, you can do that. There is a third way I'd like to show you, which is quick layouts. Here there's some options of things you can just have. So if I do this, I can just see automatically that if I go here, I'm going to have axes options. So I click on that, and there it put my titles in, gave me a key. So I'm going to work with that now and label these. I find it easiest just to highlight the axes label and then come up here and type in what you want, and it will automatically replace it with that. And if you're concerned about which one's X and Y, right, you might wonder which one is X and Y. We can look at this. We went critical reading to math. The first is always your X, so reading is my X axis. The second is your Y axis. All right, so we've done our chart title. And now we're going to move on to change axes options for both, so the minimum is 400. Now what I mean by this is it's similar to the issue with the SAT data where we just couldn't see because we have all sort of empty space. This doesn't really start to 400 for either of them. So I'm going to first focus on the y-axis and have a start right up here at 400. So I double click on the number. A menu should pop up. I'm going to change that minimum to 400. And I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to double click here and change this minimum to 400 and see if I can now see the pattern better of what is happening. And I can. I see a pretty linear line with a straight upward slope showing me there's a positive relationship. As reading scores go up in a state, so do the math scores. Now I would like you to notice when we selected this, we have this key. When you only have one thing showing, you do not need a key. So I'm going to click on that and hit delete there. And now I want to do a design black background with green markers. So let's change our color. Our color scheme now is going to be more of a green color scheme. That doesn't look green, but what I'll do is I'll start with this. Okay, so now I got blue. I love these cute little ball markers. And I'm going to double click on those markers. All right, so they pop up. I can click on markers over here and I can choose my color now, and let's go with a nice green marker. Now all I've done is my marker border. I also need to change my marker fill to green as well, so it all kind of looks the same. That looks much, much better. All right. I want to check on my marker size, so I'm going to click here. I'm going to make it a 5. This is looking good. The only thing I feel like I haven't dealt with here is the title. So I'm just going to, again, highlight this. I click on that title, and I can write math and reading and type that into the top, and there it goes. Last thing is to move it to its own sheet. So I've clicked on that. I go over to Design tab. So again, I'm looking at the chart, Design tab, Move Chart. I'm going to move it to its own sheet. I'm going to call it a Scatterplot because that's the kind of plot this is. And now I should have it. Now it has its own graph. Looking at it now, I do have some issues with it. One is the font is incredibly small on these. So I'm going to hit reading right there. I'm going to go home and I'm going to increase that font size to about 18 so you can see that. I'm going to do the same for math. So you really want to check and make sure, if I was going to present this, say we're really trying to show, people who are in states that there's this incredible relationship. I'm going to change that to 25. Between reading and math scores. I want this graph to really pop. It's not popping because these guys are actually too small now, those markers. So I'm going to go over to my markers and I'm going to actually change the size of those guys now. Let's make them a little bit bigger so you can really see it. There. Now I feel like I have a graph that is pretty interesting, that can really make a point and pops for everybody. At this point, you have now looked at that SAT data. It now is kind of interesting to look for patterns, talk about them. You have tools to do that using your graphs and sorting, looking at the patterns you see here. The next step is going to actually be to go over to our Part B, percent change right here, and see if you can do this lab, these parts on your own.